Hello, everyone, and welcome back to LFG, where we find a party to share what they've learned from game making. I am your host, Tina, and today with me I have a couple of the developers from Polyarc who worked on the game Moss and Moss 2. For starters, we have Kristen here with us. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, yeah. I was the audio director on Moss Book 2. I worked with a team of a few sound designers and external voice actress and our composer, Jason Graves. And I joined Polyarc. It was the first VR game I'd worked on. I've worked here for about 4 years. Prior to that, I'd worked at places like Microsoft, Riot Games, Monolith. So I've been making sound for games since like 2004.
That's awesome. So you are deep in the industry, you know how this works, and you were ready to bring everything you had to this project.
It seems like I would feel that way, but I'm still learning every day. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm so happy to have you here with us today to talk over some of the really cool audio aspects of the game at the start here. So, for everyone watching, we're going to be doing it a little bit different this time. Instead of having all of the guests through the whole stream, we're going to have different guests as the stream goes on. So, for starters, we're going to have Kristen, who is the audio director, as she mentioned. So, first, if you have questions while we're going through this segment, try and keep them focused around the audio parts of the game, and I'll make sure to throw those in there. We'll also have on an engineer and a designer for the game as well. So try and keep some of those questions cooking as we go through. So, for the game, in case any of you are not aware of what Moss or Moss 2 is, I am going to shamelessly read the description that y'all have on your Steam page because you described it way better than I could ever do on my own. So, Moss 2 is the award winning sequel to the fan favorite VR game Moss and has secured a spot on multiple essential and must play lists. Book 2 is a single player action adventure puzzle game from Polyarc, tailor made for VR. It combines classic components of a great game, such as compelling characters, gripping combat, and captivating world exploration, with the exciting opportunities of virtual reality. Moss Book 2 picks up right where the story in Moss left off. Having rescued her uncle Argus, Quill's adventure continues with the revelation that a winged tyrant is hunting her within the castle where her uncle was held captive. But Quill has a plan of her own, one that could finally end the merciless rule of the arcane and save the world from a great unmaking. The journey will be trying, filled with triumph and heartbreak alike, but new allies, old friends, and the very nature of the castle itself can offer help along the way. Yet in the end, it is you alone who can lift Quill up to save this world, and together rise to legend. So, if that doesn't get you interested in the game, I don't know what will, because that was written just masterfully, if I may say so myself.
You couldn't said it any better. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So with that, I think we're ready to dive in. What do you think, Kristen?
Sounds great.
All right, let's do it. So, where are we starting off in the beginning of the game here today?
Yeah, we're starting off in the conservatory, which is a greenhouse that you are going to along your adventure. Um, I think we're missing, I'm not hearing the game audio. There we go. Um, so, part of what we were thinking about when we started working on Moss was really looking at what the audio experience was in Moss 1. What did we want to change about it? What made it feel true to the IP and wanting to really keep that going? And part of that was thinking about the ambiances. The audio director on the first project, Stephen Hottie, did such an amazing job really building this system that just enabled us to really encompass the player and kind of make the environments kind of a character unto themselves. So they're all very unique and custom built kind of per room as you move through the spaces. And another thing was the dynamic objects in the game. For example, we have the pendulum here that you can reach out and grab and interact. And so a lot of what we're doing when we're building those devices is thinking about how to make them feel natural and physical. Like anytime you're in VR and you're having to like physically reach into the world and grab and you can move something, like you have to build a dynamic audio system that works with those items to make it feel really natural. And to really get that feel and sense of satisfaction of like touching something in the physical environment. Yeah.
Definitely. Would you say that actually gave kind of a unique challenge, especially since this was one of your first VR projects? What was kind of the difference between what you were typically doing versus making sure something felt right in a VR setting?
Yeah, I think the thing that VR lent itself in a way that was really magical to work with audio is that like it physically put you in the space with the characters and in the environment. And that's just not an opportunity I'd had before. Like on all the other games that I'd worked on, you're, typically sitting on a couch with a TV in front of you, and just being able to be in the space and be able to be in the world and a part of the world just really allowed the audio experience to be tailored in a way that really led to a really immersive experience in my book. And we're always thinking about, because you're also like, you're playing Quill. She's a third person character, but you're also the reader in the world. So you're like a first person entity who's like getting to reach in and grab and manipulate the environment in ways to help Quill get to where she needs to go. So for the audio experience, we're often thinking about whose perspective do we want the sound to be from? And so often we're building things bigger with more detail than they need to tell the story from Quill's perspective, because it is her story and her journey. And we really want to help convey her emotional experience as she moves through the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I can only imagine the challenge of kind of balancing the emotion of the narrative, but also a general feeling kind of at each level, because there's a series of different chapters. So how do you kind of balance that as well as you go through?
Do not let her passion surpass her means.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got distracted by VO. One more time. Sorry, I
No
got
worries.
distracted. Yeah.
It's beautiful VO, so I understand.
Yeah, Morla did this amazing job, and I think that the narrative, the story is so unique because it's a storybook. Like she's physically in the library reading from this book, and so we treated it like you're trying to read a storybook to a kid at night. And so she plays all the characters. She's the unique voice for every single one of the characters in the game. And with the exception of Quill's like emotive performances during the cinematics and her little squeaks, which one of our contractors, Elise Cates, did. I also think like balancing the emotional story, I think, was the question that you had asked. And we lean very heavily on our composer, Jason Graves, too. He just does this phenomenal job just really understanding how to pull themes in at different parts and different times in a way that, like, you don't even recognize that the theme is coming back in a new piece, but sometimes it does, and just having this hint of it there, like, really pulls you into this, like, emotional resonance of the theme that carries throughout the game. And so I just think music really heavily supports, like, the emotional experience as you move, and I also think, like, we have a really good relationship where we're constantly talking about where do we want music to shine and where do we need music to pull back, because we didn't want music pasted end to end over the experience. It kind of really moves in and out to help support the narrative as you play through the world. as you discover new spaces and enter new environments. And then, of course, bosses and characters having their own themes. So,
Of course. It has to, you hear it and you just remember this experience. For anyone who's curious, we have Dan, our wonderful behind the scenes person. You've probably seen him before on previous streams. He is so kindly being the one to play the game for us today. I have a difficult time with VR games, so he's doing it for us, which I genuinely appreciate. So let's. I really appreciate you doing this, Dan. Although I will roast you occasionally, so there's.
yeah, huge
We have
thank
a
you. I couldn't
question.
imagine me trying to play and talk at the same time. So,
Yeah, for sure. We have a question from chat here. They were wondering what your go-to audio tools or software is, and if you use a DAW for audio design.
yeah, when I joined Polyarc, I actually switched software programs that I was using. So I'm using Reaper now. That's kind of my DAW of choice for game audio, just because of the community around it and how many scripts and like automation you can kind of get built into the program out of the box, and how open it is to the community getting to build and develop for it. Yeah. But we kind of use different everyone uses slightly different software. We have a Nuendo user. I was using Nuendo prior to joining, and so but we're slowly trying to move, I think, and consolidate into Reaper. So
That's awesome. Were there any difficulties with kind of balancing the different softwares, or is it really just a matter of whatever everyone's most comfortable with?
well, I think if we want to like be able to share work, or like someone's not available and needs to be able to open up someone else's session, it's way easier if everybody's on the same software. But there are additional tools that allow you to like translate sessions between different DAWs, and so that's something that we occasionally use if we run into needing to do that.
Makes sense. So for this room here, is there any particular audio cues or anything in here that stand out to you?
Yeah, the combat spaces are always really interesting because we always put up if it's gated combat, like you'll see the kind of blocking the doors happen, and there's like audio cues that stand out with that to kind of cue you into, oh, you're entering combat along with the music. And ironically, we stay away from a lot of more rhythmic and drums and the music often throughout Moss, but combat music is kind of the one area we bring in more like rhythm and hand drums to kind of amp up the energy. And so anytime you enter into one of those combat spaces, it kind of like the energy shifts, right?
Mm.
And it always stands out. Steven did this amazing job. So like when you get the different reader abilities, one of them is being able to like paint on the vines onto the wall, like we just saw back there. And all of that is like dynamic based off of like how long are you painting, and he did this amazing job because it's kind of tied to sprite magic from Moss 1, and a lot of the sprite magic was built out of like frogs processed through granular synthesis techniques.
Oh, wow.
And it just sounds like Steven did such an amazing job on that stuff. It sounds so good. I got to work on the sword dash, which was really fun, which is one of the you get new abilities as you play throughout Moss 2 that you didn't have in Moss 1. And the sword dash was one, and the painting, the wall painting is another.
That's awesome.
We're about to enter into spoilers, another combat room. There's a new enemy in here that's new to Moss 2 that was super fun to work on, and it's the little pill bug. So he comes in and he's a ball that you can grab, and you can actually slingshot him around the room. And so he's one of the enemies I got to work on that was just super fun to get to work on, because his rolling, and then he gets up and walks and pops out, and yeah, tons of fun.
That's awesome.
There he is. It's actually my spoilers. That's my voice when he spawns in. Doesn't sound like me at all.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a fun Easter egg.
Yeah. Yeah, so cute. I had so much fun with them. But they're all dynamic because it has to be based off of the speed at which they're rolling, and so like all their loops have what we call like runtime parameter curves, or RTPCs, on them based off of the speed at which they're moving. And then we play different sounds, whether they're entering inside a tunnel versus popped out or on the ground, and they're just constantly dynamically changing based off of what's happening.
That's amazing. I love how immersive everything feels. Best feature right there.
Yeah, that's so much fun. And like we also changed the audio based on how much tension you have between how far you're pulling them back. So like if you're only just pulling them back a little bit, they just like move really slowly, versus if you're pulling them back, it gets really fast and busy, and all these really subtle details in the audio experience based off of like always thinking about gameplay, and like what is gameplay trying to do, how can we make this interaction feel really good, and what information can we give the player that is helpful and informative. So like right before the pill bugs like attack you, they make this really particular sound, and they like kind of wind up before they like lunge at you, and so like we wanted that to be really stand out so that the player could like know what's about to happen. We also do this, we have like what we call a tails system in the game. And so like going back to the conversation of scale and making things feel big, an example is like on the tail end of the sword dash, we kind of have it echo out in the room. And so that's specifically built to play in the tail system, so it feels like it's coming all around you and like it's echoing throughout the environment, and that system really helps us support like loud sounds feeling big, and building things more to Quill's perspective.
That is awesome. Oh, I'm also noticing every time we come into a new level, there's kind of a gentle fade into it, so it feels like nothing is super abrupt. It very much eases you into the space and what you're... So you take it in at the same time as what you're seeing almost, where it all kind of comes in gradually. Was that done throughout the game as well?
Yeah, we have another RTPC that actually is the room transition. So we like crossfade between the rooms and the sounds, and we actually play, typically if it's an actual room to room transition, we play the page of a book turning, and we end the book in the direction where Quill's gonna appear. So we're always trying to like lead you with your ears as to where you need to look in the next room as to where she's gonna show up and be.
What a wonderful, subtle little detail there. It sounds like there's a ton of small detail work just throughout all of this.
That is audio in a nutshell, as I always like to say, because we touch everything, right? And we are trying to support everything in the same ways. Like the animators do this such an amazing job animating the characters that we want to be able to support the detail on the characters and supporting all the actions they're doing. And same with like giving you the enemy feedback or trying to lead you room to room so that the players know where to look. Really, we're just always trying to think about how to help the players and give them as much information as we can possibly give. Oh, I love the reflections of the reader masks. Yeah. There's this beautiful moment in the beginning of the game where they just did this amazing job of like looking in the mirror and revealing you for the first time. So if players get a chance to check that out, I highly recommend it. It's kind of magical.
Oh, that's awesome. So how do you balance between enough detail work where it feels immersive without going overboard?
That is a great question. I think like we're constantly trying to look at how much time we have to build things, and also like how is the soundscape all fitting together? Because if there's a lot going on, it's about like, well, what do we want your focus to actually be on? And how do we create that focus? But if it's one of these things where you can do something subtle and it can happen in a really active moment, then it's about like trying to create dynamic mixes so that we're pulling some of those lower, quieter moments out, but allowing the focus to be drawn on what we want you to hear. And we do a lot of that with what we call side chaining systems. So it's like we take, if certain sounds are playing at a particular volume, it'll turn the volume down on something else. But in a game like Moss, it's really hard to not support the level of detail that exists in it because otherwise it becomes less believable. And so, yeah, I just think it's a balance of how much time do we have in the schedule to build something up against like, well, what does the scene really want you to hear and what's important to pay attention to? And are we mixing like really scripted moments that only happen once because then we can really custom cater them and custom design them? Or is it more of like a sandbox moment where this moment could happen anywhere in the game and reoccurs as you play through the experience? And we need to mix it differently depending on what else is going on in the scene. I love this area though. It was one of my favorites to design the ambiences for.
Yeah, there's
We got
lots
to do
of
all these
echoes and
Yeah, we did this little like creaky shifting metal, so you actually felt like you were in the greenhouse. And there's all these like, if you get to play it with, you know, more focus on the experience, it's like there's little tapping on the glass, like happening outside. Occasionally, you'll hear like flies like rattling on the windows.
Open. Quill nearly hesitated, but resolved to crush the Keeper, break the Hex, and make her uncle proud.
It's interesting. Morla, again, you're gonna get to do the boss experience here, which is quite fun and will be fun to watch.
oh man, what a reveal.
Yeah, it's fun. Boss fights are always so much fun because it's like, this is one of those moments where it's like, well, what does the focus need to be, right? And we think it's really important to give you those tells of like the enemy's projectiles shooting at you and like them falling, and so you get the little whistles as they're coming down to kind of really let you know to look out and move around to hopefully not get hit.
this is a me question. This is me
I
being
love me
selfish for a second.
questions.
So obviously the game is very stylized and in some aspects very cute and lighthearted, but obviously in moments like this in combat and boss fights, it still needs to feel intense and immersive in that way. But it still feels correct with the overall theme of the game. So how do you manage to meet that where it still fits within the style of the game but gives the intensity that like a combat scene requires?
Yeah, one of the things that the team did really on that was like super helpful to work on with everybody was an emotional map of the game. And so really understanding like where we want things to feel intense, where we want you to feel sad, where we want you to feel happy, where it needs to be a mix of intimidating and scary, but also like lighthearted and cute, to your point. And so really using that as a tool to understand like how do we map and plan the music here? Do we want you to feel happy? Do we want you to feel sad? Does it just need to feel intense? Does it need to feel really intimidating? And really using that emotional map to understand the direction of the audio experience. It helps like determine how we do the music. It helps determine how we design the sounds for the creatures in those moments, like for the boss encounters themselves. And then always having these moments where you celebrate like you as a player and Quill and what you did together. And so there's these moments in the game where if you do something successfully, like Quill like wants to celebrate with you, right? So she'll like reach out her hand and want to give a high five, and like allowing you that moment after the combat too to then just like take a breath, which I know sometimes in boss fights I'm like tensing up and getting getting a little stressed about it, but taking that breathing moment and allowing an opportunity to like take in your win, celebrate your successes, and get to do that with Quill.
Well, that's an interesting question from chat here. They're wondering if you can explain how it was making audio in Unreal Engine specifically, and what that experience was like.
I loved it, personally. I mean, I had, like, in my career, I'd only gotten to work in Unreal one time, and it was before Blueprints existed. And so getting to come and work in Unreal and Blueprints was this eye-opening experience for me as a sound designer, and because it gave me so much freedom to learn how to script my own like data that I need to send to the sound engine. Like often on those devices, or for example on the pill bug, like being able to reach in, grab, pull them, and slingshot them, like we need to calculate speed values on them. And just Unreal gave us the freedom to do that without necessarily always needing to get an engineer. Like by having Blueprint accessible, we could get that data, update that data, and send it over to the sound engine. And just a lot of the things that you need to do are really well thought out and exposed in terms of like, oh, I can go tag sounds on animations really easily. And we, of course, like built some of our own systems and expanded on some of the things that were there based on the game's needs. But just like out of the box, so much is available, and just the freedom that it was able to provide for the first time. It was one of the things I was most excited about actually taking the job at Polyarc. Getting to work with the team, because everybody's incredible, and getting to work on this project that I was like, just really wanted to work on a game that focused on characters and empathy, and just had a lot of connection and an emotional resonance with me, and then just the technical side, like getting to learn Unreal and Blueprint and the technical growth that came along with that, getting to work on this project, I was just yeah, I was so excited, and now I feel a little spoiled. So I hope I get to, build many more games in Unreal.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear that it was a good experience.
Oh yeah. One thing is like, talking about us getting to take all that data and calculate it and send it to the sound engine is also like being able to build, not without going too deep, hopefully, custom components and like things that you need to do over and over again, or reuse blueprints, and just getting to build something and build it in a way that it's reusable and makes it so we don't have to custom build all that data every single time we build a new device or
Right.
I'm really excited for this boss battle because you're gonna get to see some of Quill's interactions with you. They're super adorable. Yeah, the
Man, this
music
feels
here,
intense.
I'm just always so in love with Jason's music. I can't say enough wonderful things about it. He just like has this way, like when we were working together, he just has this way of like making. I would be like, here's the emotional experience we're really going for, and here's like a direction I feel like we could go. And he would be like, okay, he would go, he would make some music, and he would come back with something that was always a little different in an unexpected way, but even better because of it. It was just such a fun collaborative experience getting to work with him. Oh, there it is.
Oh,
Oh, she's so happy.
it's so cute. I love it so much.
Yeah,
Awesome. Well,
yeah, it's
thank you so much for
adorable.
walking us through some of the audio
The
aspects of the
keeper
game,
gone and the
Kristen.
hex lifted,
Oh yeah,
Quill
my
could now
pleasure.
return to
Anytime.
that mysterious door in the castle where glass awaited.
I'll let the narration finish there. I think we
Yeah.
do have our next guest call in the wings, so that we can also talk about some of the engineering aspects. But again, thank you so much for walking us through some of the audio of the game and giving us an insight into what the process was like. It's incredible. I mean, I think it's always a good tell with audio when it just feels correct. It doesn't necessarily stand out in the way that it's distracting. It feels like part of the experience. So it was masterfully done. And thank you so much for walking us through it.
Oh yeah, thank you so much.
Of course.
Bye.
Bye. And then next up, we will have on Colin from the engineering team. And we'll. There he is. Hey, Colin. Um, why don't, for us to kick off here, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Colin. I'm a senior engineer here at Polyarc. I do gameplay development, gameplay engineering. So my the role of my title is really just to support everybody else here at Polyarc. So anything that I can do to make their work easier is sort of like a plus in my book. So tools for designers, tools for the audio people, the artists, back end things, front end things, as well as sort of like cleaning up blueprints, making new functionality that the designers can then use to sort of expand the world. Anything like that is really kind of in my wheelhouse. So that's what I do here. I've been in software developer for about a decade now, but Polyarc is actually my first experience making video games in a professional sense. I went to school to make video games at DigiPen out in Redmond, here in the Seattle-ish area, specifically to make video games, and then decided that I wanted to take it a little easier after I graduated. So I worked at Microsoft for about 6 years, did so a bunch of interesting things there, and then it decided that I was ready to like get back into games and really dig into that part of my interests. And Polyarc really satisfies my desire to have like an emotional connection with the characters, to have really rich worlds, to have really meaningful experiences, and to make really beautiful beautiful moments between you and the character that you're interacting with, and in particular in like VR with that new technology.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today to walk us through some of the engineering aspects of the game here. I also I love that your idea of taking it easy was working at Microsoft for 6 years, but
Digipen is pretty brutal. I was there full time, and I was working a 32-hour a week job in order to support myself. So anything basically after that was taking it easy in my book.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, well, I'm ready to dive right back in if you are.
Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. Um, so to kick us off, there was one question that I saw in the previous section here where they were wondering what performance balancing was like for this game since it's stylized and obviously visually stunning. So they were wondering if there were any particular challenges with getting it to both perform well and look nice, or if because it was stylized, it was a little bit easier to be able to kind of hit both of those markers.
That's a great question. There are a bunch of sort of like performance bottlenecks that come up that I think you can experience in any kind of game, regardless of whether or not it's like stylized the way that Moss is, or if you have like a bunch of particle effects and things like that going
Thinking of a
on. And
Durin, Quill
in the case
recalled an
of
old
of
rhyme from her
um,
school
Moss,
days.
there's sort of like a
Look,
really
trust
interesting
the
like hard
sky
limit on
then,
the number
let me
of
feel it do.
AI characters that we can
How,
have in a level because
whiskers?
they're
My
complex
body?
enough that they eat up a lot of
No,
cycles,
that
especially
wasn't quite
on a
right.
mobile platform like Quest.
But the song
And so we
warned
would really like
startling
restrict
trickery.
pay special attention to the number of enemies that can spawn into a room at any given time. You can see here that there's three. I believe four is like our like upper limit in terms of if we have more than four AIs running at a time and Quill, the system starts to get bogged down a little bit. And so that's like one thing that we paid a lot of attention to is to optimize those and then also kind of limit it in order to help those optimizations pull as much weight as they could. And then our amazing technical artist Tyler
Quill
did a
wasn't
bunch of
sure
work to
what
sort
to
of
do.
adjust pixel
Trust the
densities
starving
on
and
various
see if
levels
this
where
little
necessary to
adventure
sort of
led to
like
more
raise
glass?
and lower the
We'll
quality just
return to
in
her
little
uncle
smidges,
and
but
let him
enough
know
to
she
kind of give us
failed to guide
little
its
bumps here or
strength.
there that would get us past a frame rate goal that we really wanted to get. And then just a lot of tuning for things that were happening every frame that we like didn't need to. So adjusting frame rate speeds, times between tick, and gutting as much out of the on-tick functions inside of Unreal that we could and putting them into event-based things so that we only had to trigger them exactly when we needed to instead of like checking for things every frame.
Wow, that sounds performance setups is just so difficult sometimes to balance exactly perfectly. So, sounds like you really put a lot of love in making sure that it performed exactly the way that you were wanting it to.
Thanks. Yeah, we tried. I mean, we really, one of the things we did not want to do was to sort of sacrifice the fidelity of the experience and make sure that we could give players the level of quality that we really wanted to both like in particular when developing for a bunch of different platforms like PSVR, PSVR2, Quest, things like that. All of those performance restrictions and the tool sets that you're working with can vary really radically. And so there are
You
multiple
did it!
performance passes that
The
happen
Durin
for each
returned
of
with
those things
delight.
to make sure that
I
stuff is like
knew you
tuned
would.
just right.
Never a doubt. Come
Yeah,
on! The hex
absolutely.
is broken!
I do
So to
want to.
pivot,
More glass.
oh yes, please go ahead.
I know just
Oh, I just
where
wanted to
to
cut in here real
find
quick
it.
and say that we should warp to the Foundry level before we spoil things for anybody who hasn't already experienced this game.
Alrighty. There we go.
Sorry, what were you going to say?
So my question for you was one of my favorites to ask for any developer is about bugs. So not to hop into that immediately, but I've got
No,
to
let's do
know
it.
if there were any very memorable bugs and if there were, how you either worked around it, fixed it, or if you just kind of managed to implement it into the game.
Oh man, there are so many bugs, so many memorable bugs. It's kind of a plethora to pick from. One of my favorites was that when we use the sword dash for Quill, where she sort of teleports from one place to another with her sword out, we're doing some like material swapping and some work on her mesh in the background to sort of like support all of that, and then like running a little animation. And sometimes not all of her mesh comes back the right way. So she'll sword dash and she's like normal, and then she's blue, and then all of a sudden it's just like her eyeballs and her backpack and her sword are like hovering there. And then you're just a pair of like eyeballs and weapons running around, which is just like horrifying, but like hilarious to watch. So we that was my favorite one. That was one that was like fortunately pretty easy, because like that's nice when something really obvious like that happens and you're like, oh okay, like there's an issue here, but it's clearly like her skeletal mesh did not come back the way that we needed it to, or the materials are turned off or something like that. And so those ones are like really easy to find. But with these pistons, for example, they're doing a bunch of work where we're turning off and on collision volumes when they slide in and out and things like that. And we ran into an issue where sometimes when you would pull one out or push one in, the volumes wouldn't quite work right. And so like in one of the levels we'll see here, there's an AI pathfinding problem where we are regenerating the nav mesh for the characters when you pull one out, so that you can pull one of the little screechers across them to get them to solve a puzzle. And we just like couldn't fix it. Like no matter what we did, regenerating the nav mesh, I wrote a bunch of like custom code to like handle only regenerating parts of the nav mesh that we wanted to, only when we called it to, and only up to a certain point, in order to like really try to get that fixed. And we like just couldn't, until at one point we were like, well, let's put like an invisible box in there and we'll just turn that off and on. And that turned out to work out perfectly. So it's just this funny thing where there's like a really complex problem. We spent a bunch of time trying to fix it like sort of like the right way using the tools available. And then the actual solution is just this really easy, just turn a box off and on.
I feel like that's always how it works. It's the simple but not your first assumption solution.
Definitely. I think that's pretty prevalent. Sort of not a Moss related thing, but one of my favorite examples of that is I think it was like a meme a while ago, but Fallout has a section where you're like in a train car moving around, and they didn't want to recreate an entire train car, so they just replaced the character's head with the train car, and then the character moves around. And you can't tell when you're in the game, but if you like got into a spectator camera and zoomed out, it's the player with a giant train car as a head, and that's how they resolve that problem. And it's like amazing, because you can't tell in the game. It's such a smart solution, but it is like so janky looking when viewed from the outside. But it's fantastic.
Amazing. If it works, it works.
Absolutely. And so many of the... Oh, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. Finish what you were saying.
Oh, I was going to say, so many of the one of our goals as a gameplay engineer, and I think this is probably for the designers also, is that there's a rule for consistency in the game where things behave consistently inside of the diegetic world, but they don't have to behave consistently relative to like our actual world. And so if a thing's happening that is like really fun, but doesn't make sense from a physics perspective or whatever, that doesn't really matter, because the player engagement is the thing that we really want. And so sometimes those fixes, they don't have to conform to what is like real or what like makes actual sense, as long as it's consistent in the game and the player is enjoying it. And so really we try to like take a bunch of those bug fixes and gameplay elements and like make them work around that kind of framework.
Absolutely. I've got a couple questions that came in chat here for you.
Sure.
One of the first ones here, they're wondering if there were any difficulties with developing in VR specifically versus kind of a traditional game format.
Yes. I mean, I think one of the big difficulties of VR is motion sickness, of course. Like there are whole diagnostic pamphlets about like what kinds of things make people sick and how to compensate for them, and how close the thing that you are seeing in the world needs to sort of be reflective of what your brain is telling it that it should be doing at any given time. And so there's a ton of work that we did to make sure that like your HMD, that head-mounted display that you're wearing when you're playing the game, that view is as stable and consistent as humanly possible inside of the game world, so that we reduce that motion sickness. And so that's like the first biggest one is getting that to work. And then the second one is really that in order to really feel confident about the things that we make in VR and that they work in VR, you have to play them in VR. And so there's this sort of turnaround time that needs to happen from, I made this thing in Unreal, now I need to play it in my VR headset. It is not enough to just do play an editor session and look at it on a flat screen. That's a great start. But if you want to really tune a thing to feel good and to play well in VR, you've got to put your headset off and on. And I don't think they make headsets that like just pop up, and so it's just a constant like headset on, headset off, headset on, headset off, like over and over and over all day long in order to get it. And so there's just some extra friction there in terms of like having the headset and wearing it. And then I think at one point I had like 5 different headsets on my desk because I'm like I'm doing the controls are a little different, or I'm playtesting all of these things just to make sure that the bugs work, and I have like just a mound of VR equipment that I need to like validate against. So I think those probably like 2 of the like really major differences between traditional 2D screen development and VR.
Yeah, definitely. Well, now I have to know, since you had to go back and forth between so many different headsets, which one is easiest to take on and off?
Oh, which one is easiest to take on and off? I think the Quest 2s. We have a couple of the additional like meta like pro peripherals or whatever. Not the Quest Pro, but the like nicer headbands and the nicer face mask things that they make in order to like help that experience be a little bit better. So the Quest 2 is probably like the easiest to take off and on, but I actually think once fitted that the PSVR 2s is the most comfortable. So once I have it on, that's the one that I would like to wear the longest. But it also might just be because the screen's newer and like there's less screen dooring and the visuals are just a little tighter.
Yeah, for sure. Another question from chat here. What are some of your favorite bugs, as in insects, arachnids, enemies?
I'm in the game or just in real life?
I think in the game,
both.
but I'd take your real life
Okay.
answer if you also have one there.
Fair enough. Yeah. I think so. I did a ton of work on the lobber, which is the little sort of like dung beetle-esque guy pushing the ball around, and so he was like super fun to work on because he was such a divergence from the movement and locomotion that all of our other characters have, because he has this sort of like cannon turret thing on top of a ball. He can't do the same things that the other bugs can do. Like the other bugs can strafe left and right really easily, and that's fine. That makes sense. You know, they got 6 legs, they skitter, not a problem. But it's really hard to imagine that the beetle on this thing with a couple of legs on the ground is like sliding this giant ball back and forth in that same movement. And so it was really fun to sort of figure out a way in which the lobber moved that like made sense and still made for like really engaging gameplay. And so that's sort of why he kind of spins in place and then pushes his ball all over the places. It made like the most sense for him to be doing that. And then he gets hit and he uses it as a shield and like hides behind it. And so he was super fun to work on. And then just all of the like puzzle iterations that I went through with the designers to sort of like, hey, he like lobs this thing over. Like, can we like make things hidden behind other stuff? And like, how much can we do that and still like give the player hints without like hinting exactly where it is and things like that. So I think he was the most fun.
That's awesome. On a kind of a similar vein of favorites in the game, I couldn't help but notice that incredible attack just now of the big hammer that just floats there until you decide to slam down with it. Do you have any particular favorite attacks in the game?
I really like her jumping hammer attack from on high because she sort of like rides it down like it's a sled or something. She just jumps up and then like has it between. She's like standing on the top of it, and then just this like big hammer coming down. And I just think that is like a really fun way to have interacted with that because we have the sword, the jumping sword attack where it's like a flying leap, and it would have been, I think, also really cool, but like pretty easy to have defaulted to the grab the hammer and doing like a big Thor thing where it's like coming down, and instead our wonderful animator Rick was like, let's give it like some more personality. Let's give it like make these things unique and different and all that stuff. And I really like what he ended up doing with that. So yeah, that one, the little hammer stomp is just like really fun to watch.
Definitely. Were there any attacks that were overpowered or required some balancing later on?
I mean, all all of it required a bunch of balancing. Um, just because it's so like when we're developing it, you sort of like put, all the designers have a ton of experience, and so they're leaning on that as a sort of gut check of like, oh, well, let's, well, this thing is going to do 3 damage, or this thing is going to do 5 damage, or whatever. But all of those things as initial values are always just kind of like gut instinct, and totally not as a denigration of the designers, but usually those things kind of don't. You have to experience them in the world to really decide if that's the right amount or not. And I think almost never is like the initial guess the right. And there are varying levels of like closeness to how accurate that or what the final value is going to be, but they're always just tuning and adjustment as we adjust like the life of the players, and then particularly when we added in armored enemies like you can see here on the right. There's a lot of sort of like what things interact with the armor and or don't interact with the armor, and like how do we compensate for that kind of stuff. And so there's just a bunch of rebalancing that happened there.
Yeah, definitely. It's balancing has always been something I feel I was never particularly good at because I just like to feel powerful. So I feel like I never did a very good job of finding the good balance of making sure there's still some difficulty.
Totally, I get that. There was another fun bug that I created when I was working on the lobber. Is you fire like one mine at a time, and I think I like recorded a video and sent it to all of my teammates because it was hilarious. But I like misattached one node or something in Blueprint, and it made the lobber just machine gun out mines, and it was hilarious because you just hold it down and it would just like just shoot out a string of them. And you could hit other enemies with them, and so you could just like machine gun down other enemies with these like flying mines, and it was really fun, and you felt really powerful, but totally broken.
You just leave it in as like a hard mode, exception or something at that point.
Totally, yeah. Just new game plus, just amp up the difficulty, but then everything is just like way more powerful.
Yeah, exactly. I'm curious if the development changed very much from beginning to end. Like, were there any really big or drastic changes that happened either partway through or just from the initial plan?
Yes. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I suspect that, and it's been my experience when I was making games in school, and then I feel like I've experienced the same thing even in non-game development related stuff, where oftentimes you can set a target and say, this is where I think I want to be, and you start somewhere, and the path to get to where a shipping product is never a straight line, and lots of times I think doesn't actually end up where you thought you were going to try to go in the first place. Um, one of our goals as developers is to make things that are fun, and it's really hard to tell um, exactly what is going to be really fun from the get-go. Like we all have ideas, and I think oftentimes lots of those things are like pretty close. But like once you get in and play it, it's like this is fun for 10 seconds, but is it fun to do over and over and over again? Maybe not. Or especially like in VR, where there's like a lot of motion, is like a wrist turning gesture might be like really satisfying, like you're unlocking a thing, like you're doing a key in a door or something. But that gesture is not fun to do 50 times in a row. Your wrist gets really tired really fast. And so with that kind of thing in mind, the different stages of development sort of mean that the first stage is really like we have a generalized idea, but we don't actually know exactly what we're going to do. We're gonna make a bunch of stuff, and we're going to try that. We had one of our designers made a plant that like launches Quill at one point that you could jump onto and then trigger, and it would like shoot up, and she would like jump off of it, and it was like really cool, but we like couldn't figure out a way to make it work consistently the way that we wanted inside of the world, and so we sort of shelved it for later evaluation. So I think we ended up in an amazing place, but I think that the place that we ended up with is sort of only looks like an outline of what our goal was, and that all of the fillings for that outline are just like really different. Lopper almost got him. Oh, I cannot
I'm muted.
hear you.
Oh my
Oh,
god.
there we go.
She had to
Ugh.
find a way down.
I'm a professional, don't worry.
Been there.
Everyone in chat can add a +1 to how many times Tina has been muted on stream now, but we're I was just saying it's one of my favorite questions to ask, because I know things never go perfectly from the design document all the way to the end. So hearing about where things might have had to change along the way is always fun.
Totally. Yeah, we did a lot of changing along the way, especially with the development of the lobber. The ability to manually fire, to manually engage an enemy, is not a thing that we had in the first Moss. You could grab the Scorcher and you could like direct on the D-pad or on the stick pad, and that would like shoot in a direction. And the lobber was the first one that we made where like you could point it and then you actually had to do a thing. And so there was like a ton of iteration on our part to be like, should it fire automatically, and what does that mean in terms of like how much control you have about where it's going to fire at. And we tried like interval firing, where it would fire every like second or two or something like that, and then moving it around. We tried having it fire on release. We tried having it fire when it like found things that we thought you might want to fire at. Did a bunch of different stuff to finally land on the method that seems really simple that we have now, which is to click to fire. But it wasn't immediately obvious to us that that was like the best way to interact with the lobber, because that was not a paradigm that we had been using beforehand. And so how much do one of our other considerations in line with that is like really keeping our controls not super complicated. And since we didn't have that, that meant adding a new button, and there are a lot of ramifications for trying to teach new players or players who are coming back, like, here's a new thing that you have to do that you didn't have to do before, and how impactful is that to the amount of like brain space that is required in order to like play the game and have like a really good intuitive time to it. So there's a lot of consideration that we put into like things like adding a control that requires another button.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, just got a pretty interesting question in chat here. From Sparky McSparks, one of my favorite names to see pop up.
Right.
Did designers implement features in Blueprint and carry them through to shipping, or engineers create code classes? Or was there a feature / story beat that design really wanted that required a clever solution from engineering?
Oh, that is a great question. Um, I'll give the very frustrating engineering response, which is that all of those things, and it depends on what you want. Um, um, yes, we totally have gameplay elements, full gameplay functionality that was created in Blueprint from the get-go, that stayed in Blueprint all the way into the shipped game. That is one of the really powerful things about Blueprint, is that you can do that, and it does not require engineering support specifically in order to make it like usable or performant or like a thing that is can be shipped. That being said, lots of the stuff that we made also was sort of dreamed up by the gameplay engineers, or the designers reached out and said, "Hey, I had this idea for this thing, but I don't quite know how to do it." And then an engineer will step in and set up the basics for it, like make a blueprint class, and then do a bunch of the like math-related work on the back end that is going to be a little easier, I think, to do in code than it is in Blueprint. And we're all the engineers are sort of like math nerds anyway, and so we're all doing that kind of stuff. And then it's a collaboration between the designer and the engineer, where some of it's in code, some of it's in Blueprint. It's a bunch of our stuff is that way. And then sometimes a thing gets created fully in Blueprint and it is not performant enough for one reason or another. And it is really helpful for an engineer to step in and be like, "Hey, I can take this great thing that you made and I can make it faster. I can make it more performant. I can make it easier to use." And we can take that and extract a bunch of it out into a C++ code. And then again, Unreal makes it really easy to keep all of the stuff that a designer wants, the availability of variables and functions, make all of those things still just as available in Blueprint, even though the underlying class is in C++. And so there's just like a bunch of that happened all throughout our development.
Yeah, that's awesome. Another question that I was seeing pop up a couple times is they're wondering what it was like to develop VR in Unreal Engine specifically, and just kind of what that experience was like.
Yeah, I can answer that question. I think, and I'm hedging my bets a little bit because I have never developed VR in something other than Unreal, and so I can't really qualify that as like Unreal was better because of this thing. But I will say that Unreal made it very easy to develop in VR because it is so supportive of so many different platforms. The access as a game studio to the like underlying code means that we can make tweaks or adjustments if we need some specific thing in the engine itself, which is fantastic. We're not locked out or locked from making those kinds of things, or needing to do some kind of workaround where we make our own module that's like most of the engine. We just modify engine code where we need it in order to be supportive of our specific goals. And then the fact that you can play VR, you can test VR straight from Unreal without having to package or cook a build is like super powerful. And so we can do a bunch of prototyping in a 2D space with a keyboard and mouse that I'm really used to, and then I can pop on my headset and then I can hit play in VR, and then suddenly I have the thing that I just made in my headset without any other intermediary steps. And that constitutes the thing that made me take my headset off and on all the time, but gave me the ability to take my headset off and on all the time. There was no long 30-40 minute process of getting it from my dev computer onto a machine that I could then had the VR that I could then play from. And so that was like super valuable.
Awesome. Well, good to hear. I always love asking those questions just because it's the Unreal Engine channel. So it almost feels like a threat. It's like, tell me, why did you like developing in Unreal? Another question here is, was it difficult to make such a cute character feel powerful without feeling absurd in the process?
That is an excellent question. I'm not sure I am the right person to ask that, or to answer that. I can give my perspective on it, but I think a ton of and the majority of what gives Quill her personality has got to be attributed to our animator Rick, who just did such
Mm.
a fantastic job of making her just like a total badass as a little mouse, but also not like invincible, and making her like vulnerable and have a personality, and that the work that she does is not like she's not a superhero. One of my favorite things that I remember talking with him about as it relates to that is there's a moment in the first game where you get Quill and she's like climbing up over a thing, and it would be so tempting to make it so that she just like leaps up onto this log and over it, and it's no problem. And that's very like superhero-y and badass. But because he wanted to give her this personality to show her as a smaller part of this world, there's like a bit of a struggle, and it's not like it's not like it's hard for her. It's just that it's not a thing that she just like vaults over no problem, and so that gives her character like a bunch more texture, and you can see if you watch all the things that she does, you can see that like suffused throughout all of her animations that just give her this like wonderful, amazing life that that I would never I would never be able to do. And so really, it's us like working with him to make all of that stuff come to life and shine.
Yeah, definitely. I know animation is. I don't want to necessarily say unsung hero, because I feel like at this point everyone understands the impact of really good animation, but it's hard to do right. So I definitely think that's a great call out for your animator, because he did a great job.
No, he's fantastic. He's so fast too. Like he does amazing work. Like such great subtlety in so much of the stuff that he does, and he does that stuff so quickly. It kind of blows my mind. Like I don't actually know how he does it. He's a wizard.
Truly, yeah. Another question here is, oh, interesting, about different VR platforms. Was there a particular VR platform that you had the least technical difficulties with developing for, or were they all kind of equal?
That's a really interesting question. I would say that they were all I feel like they were all pretty equal in terms of like the mainstream platforms.
Mm.
My opinion is a little skewed, I think, because the transition from PSVR to PSVR 2, for example, those platforms, despite both being Sony, are like actually kind of pretty different.
Mm.
The console itself is radically different from an architecture perspective, which is like really nice and really easy to use on the new platform. And I'm not saying it's hard to use on the previous platform, but that even that delta from one to another, even if the new one is like really nice and convenient, is still a delta that needs to be overcome. And so there's like some work there, but because we had the majority of the game already made at that point, working into that platform was like a little easier than it might have otherwise been. And so it's hard for me to evaluate some of those things because we had like a fully fledged platform or a fully fledged game that had been made and optimized for some platform that is like slightly adjacent to it. And so the same sort of thing happened. We just launched on Pico earlier this week, and then last week for Moscow 2. And both of those are Android-based platforms, and so because they're a little different than Quest, but because they're both Quest and Pico are Android-based platforms, developing for Pico was a lot easier than it probably would have been if we didn't have the base work of doing the Quest one. And so that's a similar, like, slightly harder to evaluate because we got lucky timing-wise.
Right, yeah. It really did kind of work out perfectly between some of those releases. Let's see. What is... trying to think of how to phrase this without me jumbling my words. What is your favorite feature or aspect of the game?
What is my favorite feature or aspect of the game? Well, My actual favorite feature I don't want to talk about because it's a little spoilery, but it's
Okay.
super cool. And if you play the game, you will experience it in the last level. That's the limit of my spoileriness, but it's great. I think
Okay.
um, I'm a little biased. I really definitely it has some flaws, but I really like the climbing mechanic. I made it, so I'm very biased in that regard. But the thing that I really liked about it is that it added a bunch of additional verticality to the levels that we didn't have the ability to do in the first Moss. And
Mm.
so there's like a lot of ramps and ledges that you can scramble over in order to get up things, and the walls allow us to make levels that are a lot taller than they would have previously been without having to have a bunch of walkways and things for you to navigate on in order to get up to that point. And so the designers did a bunch of really cool stuff in like the sprite realm where you're like climbing around the edges of walls and you're using them to like get over obstacles and things like that. And I think that was just really fun to do, to sort of like unleash the creativity of our designers in a way that they were a little more constrained in the first one.
Yeah, definitely. I think adding in kind of different movement mechanics, especially between like in a sequel, is always an interesting way to kind of give new life, a new flair to an already established um, franchise or game series. Was that something that you decided you wanted to have pretty early on in the process, or was that added in later?
Yeah, no, that was a thing I started working on. That was the first part of the project that I worked on when I was hired at Polyarc, was to make the climbing system. And so it went through a bunch of iteration because I had not been working on gameplay mechanics for a very long time at that point. And so it went through a bunch of bunch of changes before we got to the shipped version that we had. But we always knew from the get go that having some additional traversal mechanics, a desire to make games to add a little verticality to the games that we didn't already have, was a way that we could expand the world of Moss, both figuratively and literally. And so I think, yeah, we basically always knew that's the thing that we wanted to do, is just execute it in a way that felt good.
Yeah, for sure. Were there any big learning moments through the development of this game?
Mm, it's all learning moments all the way down. um, when you're working when you're a I joined on as a slightly more I was not a junior engineer, but because I hadn't worked in games for a while, I was not a senior engineer when I was hired on, and a bunch of the people that I worked with had been working on in games for 10 or 15 years at that point. And so there's just an amazing wealth of knowledge from all of those people, both the engineers and the designers and the animators and the artists and all those things, and everybody knows different things about the way game development works, that there's just no end to the ability to learn about things. And so really it was all learning moments. Like there was never a time, I think, when I was like, oh yeah, I know this is exactly the way to do it, and then somebody would be like, well, that totally works, but here's another way, and that other way isn't necessarily better or worse, but there are just different approaches that you can take, and they all have their trade-offs. And so I think that was a lot of that process, was like kind of figuring out what just learning from everybody around me, the ways in which they made games, and that helped emphasize and inform the way that I make games.
Yeah, definitely. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to walk through some of the engineering aspects of the game with us, and telling us about some of the fun stories and bugs and all that you overcame. I think it really helps hearing that even on these projects that end up being award winning and are just stunning, still go through similar challenges, and can still end up as an incredible project at the end of it all. So thank you so much for walking us through that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on.
Of course. And then next up, I know we have our next guest for today, Doug, who is one of the designers on the Polyarc team. So we'll bring him on in just a second. But again, big thank you, Colin, for coming on and talking about this with us.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
You too. Bye. Awesome. There we are. Hey, Doug.
How's my mic? Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
Awesome, awesome.
Welcome onto the stream.
Thank you, thank you. I caught a little tail end of Collins there. I loved all his points. I'm like, ooh, good story, good point.
Yeah, it was fantastic. He did such a great job and got to talk so much smack on designers all the way through. It was great.
Darn engineers.
Well, to start us off, how about do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Polyarc?
Sure. My name's Doug Burton. I'm a designer here at Polyarc. I got here about 3, 4 years ago, just to come work on Moss Book 2. I've previously worked down in Austin, Texas, doing games for like the last 10, 12 years-ish, I think. Started off doing like some FPS games, worked on Darksiders 2, so that was kind of my first I'd say big console game, getting to do some puzzles, getting to do some world exploration, that sort of thing. And then since then, I've just been kind of doing new stuff as new things came online. So once mobile gaming got big, tried to make some mobile games with some friends, so that was fun. Anytime I can get to like learn new technology, I'm kind of happy to hop on it. And so when I had some friends working on VR games, I was like, yeah, that's new stuff, cool, more immersive games. I am all in. So yeah, I've been doing the game design for years now, and I love it.
That's awesome. Good to hear. So, how do you think VR compares to some of the other kinds of development you've
Mm,
done thus far?
it's definitely different. Like, when you're thinking about like a lot of game design is like for me is like player feel. And so VR takes a lot of the barriers away too. So sometimes players, get frustrated with just with controls or just different things kind of out of your control. But once someone's in VR, you kind of control the whole scene. So you control everything they're going to see, everything they're going to kind of feel, that sort of thing. And so it is really nice getting to watch people play it, and they get to be fully immersed, and you get to catch a lot more little things. Little like frustrations or confusing moments because people are so immersed into it that when they are frustrated or confused, they really show it. They're really like, oh wow, I tried to grab something, it didn't work. What happened? What the whole world doesn't make sense to me right now. And so it's always nice to like catch those things and like, okay, people really want to, break the barrels. People really want to grab these things, and so it's easier and a lot more fun to give people those things that they're expecting to happen because it's a whole virtual world. They're using their actual hands, and so when things are like just firing on all cylinders, people are loving it. They're fully immersed, and then whenever a little thing is off, it kind of breaks that immersion really quickly and obviously. So it's a lot easier to catch as a designer too. And overall, it's just more fun to watch people play the games too.
Awesome. So, would you say that you're pretty happy in the VR space right now?
Oh yeah, definitely loving it. You get to do a lot of cool things. Like you can make a lot of effects that look really cool in games, but when you're playing them in VR, they look and feel just 10 times as cool. Like, a really nice vortex uh V effect will look cool, but when you like really see it in like the world next to you, it has a whole different feeling than seeing it like on the TV. And so yeah, getting to make things like that is fun every time.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. Well, if you're ready, I think we can dive right back into the project and I can pick your brain a little bit more on some design questions.
Sounds great.
Awesome. And then also just as a forewarning for everyone, we're Dan's quest is on low battery, so we're
Oh no.
playing till it dies. We'll see how far we get. Um, but yeah, so I guess my first question I have for you is a pretty broad one, but just what was overall it like designing um, some of the big aspects of this game, especially since it's a sequel. It's a follow-up to an already
Hmm.
well-loved title.
Yeah. One thing I do like about working on sequels is that you have so much player feedback to pull from. So you already know the things that players really love and really want more of, and then what things that players are like, this was cool. I wish there was more of that, or wish that was expanded upon. So coming into the game, we immediately knew that okay, players love Quill, so we know we're gonna push more of that. They love those moments connecting with her, so we gotta make sure we delve into that. But then people are like, hey, I kind of want more combat options. I want that to be a little more interesting. Want more things to do in puzzles. And so that was like, cool. We know we're going to want more weapons. And then how can we use those weapons to give players more ways to like express themselves, to do more player or more puzzle solving? And then also how can Quill's personality kind of come through in those weapons too? So that all kind of just feeds back into the same things, knowing what players want, being able to deliver more of those things. So definitely love that about working with sequels. One of the harder things about Moss in particular, and just puzzle games in general, is just puzzle design. So puzzle
Mm,
design is already tough, but then you add uh,
Will recalled
verticality,
her
you add more
uncle's
depth,
heated
you add
retelling of the
VR where
Cinder
their
Night.
camera can kind of be anywhere, they
That
can move
barbaric
anywhere.
war
Like you could literally
obsessed
get up and
wanton
walk to the
blindsided
next
me,
room,
then
even though you're not
smashed my
technically
whole
in the next room
battalion.
yet, since Quill is still behind you.
What I
So there's all
wouldn't
these little
give
things of
for
just like,
another
the player has a
goal,
lot more freedom.
I'd crush
Uh,
him
we don't want to
myself.
restrict that freedom, so we have to
Will
like build
wanted
around
nothing
it and
more
prepare
than
for
to
it, and
deliver
also just
that
encourage them
justice.
to kind of play the way we want, so that way they can enjoy it and don't run into any moments where things aren't perfectly planned for them. So,
sure.
general, yeah, VR is a lot of that, a lot of just managing where the player could go and kind of where you want them to go, so that they get the experience that's going to be fun for both of them, or for you and them. Yeah, it's a lot of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I never even thought about the difficulties of puzzle designing, honestly, which makes sense because they need to be
Hmm.
difficult. So how do
Hmm.
you find inspiration for making something kind of unique that's challenging but not over the top and finding that sort of balance?
Yeah, it's a whole ton of iteration. And the good thing with Polyarch is we have so many people of different skill levels and different VR comfortability. So we have like a lot of people to pull from to kind of figure out if something's too difficult, or if it's reading, or if it's like confusing in different ways. And so you kind of just start with a simple idea, a mechanic or two you want to explore, or a lesson you want to teach the player, and then you start with a very basic version of that. Say, does the lesson make sense? Okay, then you kind of sort of like obfuscate it a little bit, give them a little bit of red herring, and then so they'll kind of like go with the what appears to be the easy solution. You're like, okay, I just got to move the brick to the right, done. And then you're like, oh wait, but what? How do you get Quill on the brick first? And you're like, oh, okay, well if I move it to the left, she can get on it, but I can't move it to the right with her on it. And you just kind of just layer those little understandings. So like, okay, I understand this part of it. Now I know where I need to get to. So what am I missing? And then making sure that those moments are kind of like cleverly disguised, so that way people find them. They're like, oh, I should have seen that from the beginning, but I wasn't looking at the problem from the right perspective, type thing. And so it's just a
Mm,
lot of that, lot of that, just sort of giving people the problem, making sure they obviously know the solution, and then giving them interesting ways to kind of breadcrumb their way through it.
yeah, absolutely. Um, did you ever consider implementing something like tooltips or hints or things like that, or was that not part of the plan?
I think what we did, we have what we call like new user experience moments. So it is the times where the controller will come in and tell you like, oh, you need to grab this, or you need to move this left and right. And we try to keep those to a minimum. But there are just times where, through play testing, we're like, okay, this makes sense once you tell them. There's some things that, just people just won't always think of to do immediately. Like even play testing, and you have, a giant brick that's glowing. A lot of people just don't kind of connect. They're like, oh, I can just grab it, me as a person. So like a lot of times people will try and do things with Quill, but we're just like, we actually want you as the player to like do this action. And so then we'll use those kind of ghost hand tooltips. But for most of the puzzle stuff, we want to keep it in game and keep it between you and Quill. So a lot of the puzzle solving is the tips are going to come from Quill. So if you're on a puzzle for too long and you like let her stand, then she'll kind of look at you and then give you a hint, like, oh hey, I think the next step is grab that brick, move it over there, or let's go to that button and then move this thing. And so that's a nice way to like make sure we're not hitting you over the head with the answers. We're not like annoying you with the solution. Just like, hey, if you need a tip, your friend Quill's there to just kind of move you along. And it sounds like people like that a lot. They don't feel rushed or forced, and they kind of like appreciate Quill helping and being involved in kind of the puzzle solving. So I think that kind of worked out really well.
Oh, that's awesome. Speaking of Quill, I am curious, what were some of the challenges of designing both maybe the levels and just the overall experience? Because you have Quill, who's the main character of the story, but you also have yourself as the reader. So how do you balance the experience between those two characters while still feeling cohesive?
Yeah, that's a good question, because that was something that did come up a lot when we were making rooms, making puzzles. We never wanted to make a puzzle where it was just you moving Quill around. You're just like, I gotta move Quill to the button, and then move her to here, and then move her there. We also didn't want it to just be like you pressing all the buttons and doing other things, and then once you're done, the door opens and Quill can walk out. We always wanted there to be that back and forth. Like you set up a situation for Quill to do something, and then Quill can set up a situation for you to do something. So that way, again, it feels like you two are working together. There's always that back and forth. And so we also use that for the weapons. So like as you get new powers, you know, you can make Quill kind of hold the weapon up, so that way you can charge it up with some special ability. And then even then, that ability usually requires you to still be involved to like get the full use out of it. So like the hammer here, you can charge it up with Quill, and she can lay it down for you. And then once you're ready to trigger it, you can trigger it yourself. And so that's when we went through a lot of iterations, like, should it auto trigger? Should Quill trigger it again? Should it follow Quill? Like, is it weird if it stays where she was, and how long should it stay? All those like little things. But we did always want to make sure it reinforced that back and forth. And I think once we kind of decided on this version of like, it'll like float there waiting for you to like trigger it, that was kind of the last thing we wanted from this, to be like, okay, it's a back and forth interaction, and it feels really good when you finally slam it down yourself. And so that was a fun one to kind of put together. But yeah, most of the rooms kind of stick to that back and forth interactions.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite example of kind of those interactions between the two?
Ooh. I mean, I like them all. I mean, yeah, I think a lot of the puzzles have a lot of the team kind of involved. Like everyone kind of gets to chime in on like what they like about the puzzles and rooms, and so I think everyone kind of has a piece of the game that they gave direct feedback about. One of my favorites is, I mean, I like the warden boss is one of my favorites. I think this is one of the earlier things I made on the game, and then it just kind of evolved as the game got put together. Early on, he actually didn't have a hammer; he had an axe, and so we were kind of building around that. But then once we gave Quill a hammer, we were like, well, you know, you got to have hammer versus hammer battle. And so that was a big moment of being like, okay, so how are we gonna, you know, how is she gonna defeat this giant guy with this giant hammer with her tiny hammer? And so that was fun to just kind of come up with ways to like put that together. And so we knew we wanted you. I had an idea in my mind of you grabbing the giant hammer, and you see him like trying to like, what is holding me? How do I get out of here? And then at that moment, Quill can come in and kind of like back you up and do some extra damage. So that's what happens here. Like he lays down the giant hammer. You can grab it long enough for Quill to get in some hits. And so that was one I really liked. And it was kind of taken from, you could do that with the enemies, so you can kind of grab them and then let Quill hit them. But early on, we found it kind of made her feel a little bit like a bully-ish. So you can still do that, but then it breaks them out of the grab. So that way, you can't kind of do it. You can't keep doing it automatically, I feel like. But we brought it back for this fight, because this is a fight where, you know, you're so outmatched that that bully feeling actually played into what we wanted. We wanted to feel like her overcoming this like insurmountable force, and so that kind of worked out nicely here.
Yeah, definitely. I'm seeing a few people talk about how intense this particular boss fight is.
I feel like it's visually intense, but when you're in it, it feels more puzzly because you're just like looking for the moments when you need to take the correct action, and then
Mm,
once you kind of like figure that out, you gain that confidence of being like, okay, like right now, people early on are freaking out when there's all these hammers coming down, there's these fire trails, but kind of once you understand it, you're like, okay, I can handle this challenge, I got this, and you're just waiting
yeah.
for this moment of like, okay, when do I get to, take it back to you? And so that was a big thing too. We wanted it to look and feel big and grand, but when you're playing it, you slowly get that feeling of like, oh, I know what I'm doing here. I can get over this with what I know.
Mm, man, I'm like, I'm in it. I'm immersed in
Yeah,
this boss fight right now.
it's a fun one, and this is one too where you can let the animators kind of like go wild with it too. It was like, okay, we know we want this big guy. We know that he kind of has a limited set of moves, so go big with the hammer slams and yeah, and him getting hit and all that. And then yeah, these big moments of like Quill taking down this huge guy. Oh, she's so cute.
That's awesome. She is so cute. Ugh. This whole game is adorable.
Almost here, Uncle Argus in
It
her
was
mind,
yeah, like I said, we
overjoyed
definitely
knowing the
knew
warden had
players connected
finally
with
been
Quill,
defeated.
and so we always wanted to
Now
like
she had
reinforce
to
that.
face Tylan
Moments like
and
this
finish
where
the
like you
plan.
both kind of accomplished something that
Hmm.
was really big for both of you, and so we wanted to just have those moments of being like, now you can kind of enjoy it.
Yeah,
Oh, here's one of my
definitely.
favorite parts. When you jump off this, if you move towards the warden's foot, she kind of does a little kick on his foot, and that's always one of my yeah. I love that. I was like, oh, that's so cute.
Just the extra little finisher there.
hmm
So I did
Yeah.
want to know before we move on if we're allowed to go past this boss fight or if
They
that
knew
was
where to
the end
go.
there.
Yeah,
I
yeah, we can
couldn't
To the
go.
remember.
top of the
Yeah,
castle,
we could probably get to
closer
like
to
the
the
beginning of
skies.
the last
That's where
level.
she'd
So
find that
yeah, you can probably just
murderous
keep
Okay,
working your
warden.
way back up to the hub area.
awesome. We'll see how far we can push this quest.
Yeah.
With
Oh
the
yeah.
battery.
How far the battery takes us.
Yes. So I have a question that I also gave Colin earlier that I'm interested to see your side of it too. But what
hmm
was it like balancing, or maybe compromising, might be a better word for it sometimes, some really cool design ideas that maybe weren't the most realistic to actually implement through engineering? How do you approach
hmm
particular challenges like that?
Yeah, so usually when you come into that, if someone says you can't do something, it's just like, okay, cool, we got to find a more interesting way to do it anyway. Like we're gonna do it, we just can't. We can't use that system or that original idea, but we want to. At least we know what feeling we want to create, and so what do we have that we can use to like recreate that? I'm trying to think of anything big that changed. Like, I mean, so much stuff changed. A lot of things. Oh, one thing we were gonna do. Oh, which one? Which change? We were gonna have. Uh, oh yeah, we were gonna have like a hub area with like a lot more characters, sort of like in the game that you kind of pet and interact with, and that was one of those things of like to give the characters as much life as we want to give all our characters. It was like, what are we gonna pull from? It's like we don't have the time to make everybody as cute and lovable as and personality exuding as Quill. And so we had to like make the compromise. Okay, let's put some of that stuff in the book. And so the book was a place where it was a little more lightweight to kind of put some character stuff.
Hmm.
So that's why you kind of see like Bernard. You get a lot of book time with him, just because he was something we would have loved to have more in the world. But it was like, oh, to really bring that character to life the way you want to would take so much from other areas of the game. So we're like, okay, his personality still comes through in the book. So we're still very happy with that. Uh, and we always have him for more projects. So that's one of the things where we're like, okay, we're still gonna keep it. We just can't maybe go as in depth with it as we wanted to.
Right. Yeah. That's
It
that's such an interesting way that you would be able to kind of get around some of those issues is the fact that there is the book. So yeah, if something is too demanding or too long for maybe the
Yeah, if it's
actual
just gonna be
gameplay,
too
toss in the book.
heavy or too much weight for other teams, then you kind of just say, okay, well, how can we use this where it won't have to be as much weight, but we can still get the sort of like emotional or personality out of it that we want.
Mm, that's awesome. That's that feels like
And then
such a cheat.
yeah, I know.
Like put it in the
'Cause
book.
that's why it's hard to pick. Like, man, what had to change or didn't go in the game that like I missed? Because so many of our ideas that we said we probably couldn't do, we still did in some form. And so I have trouble sometimes remembering what did this look like before, this kind of final version. So like even this
Yeah.
Quill's attack here, that went through so many different versions and iterations of like how is it gonna work, what's it gonna do. And now same thing. I have trouble remembering how all the other earlier versions worked because kind of once we decided that like you throw it out, you can call it back, and you can charge it up to hit this stuff. It just answered so many other gameplay questions that we were just like, oh yeah, that's how it
The
has to be.
welcoming
That's how it
chirps of a
should have been from
sprite
day
guide
one. Like
reminded Quill of
how do we
all
try
the
anything
wonderful
else? Yeah,
strangers she'd met along the way.
It was fate.
They
Ended up
were the
exactly the
moths
way
her
it needed
uncle
to.
wanted to save.
yeah.
Before anything else,
Um,
Quill had to
a
feel
question
honored.
from chat here. They're wondering, did the story inform how a lot of the puzzles or combat were made, or did you make VR prototypes that drove the narrative of the game?
Yeah. So the narrative was like loosely laid out, like super early on. I think even Moss 1, we already knew where we wanted the story to go.
Mm,
And then Moss 1, we kind of found a middle stopping point because we were like, we have a small team, can only make so much game. And so we were kind of like, hey, this is a great point to kind of like pause the story. And then luckily everything went great and we were able to finish the story with book two. So a lot of the big beats were kind of planned out, but what the areas looked like and kind of were gonna be exactly, I think wasn't planned out. So like the conservatory, we kind of knew what kind of gameplay we wanted to happen in there and what story experience we wanted. Like we wanted Quill uh, kind of going off on her own to search for something that she thinks is going to make Argus happy. And she's like, it's worth the effort that I go and do this because then when I come back to him, he'll be like, oh, thank you for doing it and everything. So we knew we wanted that to be the kind of story beat that's happening there. But what the room looks like, that's all kind of up to us. And that's all prototyped and iterated on up until release day, putting little tweaks here and there, adding enemies, taking
mm,
away enemies, changing the kind of enemies. Um, so the story just gave us more ideas of what to do and kind of like what the world state is in. So like right now there's like enemies here and they're kind of weren't. We want just kind of be a quick backtracking section. But then we kind of thought like, hey, you were just like in their base, just took down one of their big boss guys. So maybe they're kind of just out in mass more. Like you kind of like riled up the beehive, and so now there's a lot more enemies like that weren't here earlier. That's something that
mm.
story like kind of gave us an idea to change. For most of it, we really prototyped cool room ideas, cool puzzle ideas, and then made sure the story beats fit around them. And so I got to do a lot of that work, a lot of the story beat stuff, figuring out where we had moments where things were slow and quiet, where Quill could talk, where you could do a cool emotional beat, and then which moments were all about puzzle solving or combat. And so it's really just
Yeah,
laying out those things and making sure you have enough space and room for everything to shine.
that is awesome. And probably difficult, I can imagine.
It's a puzzle in itself. I'm trying to put it all together.
Definitely. Um, were there any particular levels that you are very proud of?
One I really like is one of the simplest ones. It's where you're going into the foundry and there's the big bridge that kind of falls down. And that one was like I just wanted this moment of like, oh, there's this big bridge, something the cool door you're going to is behind it. And then I just wanted that
Chris'
moment of
heart
like it slowly
sank.
opening and
This
then
was the
slamming
last
down and get
place
that
she'd been with her
reverberation echo
uncle.
sound and all that.
He'd
And so that was
protected
one that was
her,
actually really simple
trusted her.
feel wise, but figuring out
She
what that
needed to make
puzzle
him
was to open
proud,
up the door, we had to change
and
a
so
lot
she would.
because it
Mm.
was like sort of in the middle of the game, and early on we weren't sure which weapons you would have at that point, and so that informed like, okay, well we can't use certain puzzle elements if you don't have certain weapons yet.
Well,
And at one point in the development, you could get the weapons out of order, so you can kind of like decide to go to the foundry first or go to the conservatory first. And so then it was like, well, who knows what they might have at that point, and should the puzzle require both? And so that was one where the puzzle changed a lot, but the idea of the bridge and the main layout of the room all kind of stayed the same the whole time. So that was one I felt like it worked early on, and we had to find pieces around it. And then similar thing too, when you're coming down the elevator into the depths, there's like some cool bats that fly by, and you kind of see up out of the cave, the sunlight shining in. And that was one of those ones where I was just like, oh, this is the feeling I wanted, like as you're coming down to these caves, and also the feeling I wanted as you're like going further into the caves. And so all those things were, so for me, it's really about like if the room evokes the feeling we wanted to get, then I'm always super excited about it and happy with how it turned out.
Mm. That's awesome.
And then there's some
I
later
just
rooms that get really trippy, which are also super cool.
yeah. I do love how every level we've gone through so far is so different from each other, but you've still
Hmm.
managed to remain consistent with the style and the feel. So it doesn't feel out of place, but we do get to
Absolutely.
explore such different and varied environments. How did you go about really nailing that down and making sure that everything still felt cohesive, but you got to explore such diverse parts of this world?
Yes, that's one of the things too. Like being a designer, working with artists, you want to give them space too to make the really cool ideas they want to make. So so as a designer, I'm like, oh, I got this cool puzzle idea I want to make. And early on, it's just got gray boxes blocked out. And then once the kind of puzzle feels good, you can go to the artist and start talking about like, what do you want to do in this area? Like, what cool scenery are you excited to create? And then once you two start going back and forth, you get some really cool things like this, where they want like a really long sight line. You're like, oh, cool, I can use that to put this cool broken window over there. And then so once you kind of get that back and forth going, and you're both just excited about what you're creating, then you get to make some really cool scenes like these. And the art team, uh, they're always just like putting ideas together and looking for opportunities for where to put them.
Please,
So as a designer
let me
too,
help
you
you.
kind of don't want to constrain the artist. You want to be like,
Unleash chaos
you want to just say, here's the
unceasingly
room,
and
here's
make
the puzzle,
unmaking.
but whatever cool visual idea you have, we can make it, we can make it work around that. And so I think that's a
Mm,
big thing of like you gotta have that back and forth between the team members to make sure everyone's making something they think is really cool.
yeah, definitely. And then I guess kind of in a similar vein, especially with it being VR, obviously the player kind of has some free agency of where they're looking and what they're choosing to give their attention
Hmm.
to. So, how do you gently direct the player's attention to where you want it to be?
That's one thing where yeah, all the kind of classic game design rules still work really well. Lighting is a big one. Make sure kind of where you want them to go is like lit up a little bit brighter. Yeah, so it's always like, oh, okay, I'm going towards the bright light. So that always works really well. Then sound cues. So yeah, this is a level where the uh, the owl does a lot of flybys, and so we'll kind of have the visual cue or we'll have the sound cue kind of come in a little early so you kind of look towards the screech, and then just as you look that way he kind of flies by your eye line. And so yeah, all those tricks still work really great in VR of just lighting and sound. And then one thing we do in this game, in between rooms there's that little like black screen pause, and we make
Mhm.
sure that's at least a couple seconds. because it kind of makes people. So you're here, you're looking to your right, the screen goes black, you naturally go back to the center. So then when every
Mm.
room you're back in neutral. And we ran into an issue where on PSVR2 it was loading so fast that people were looking to their right, go to the room, and before they turned back, the next room would load in. And so now they kind of be a little bit off center, and that was a little confusing. So we got to add in like a little like always pause, even if loading goes great, pause for a few seconds, so that way people kind of naturally go like, oh yeah, well while I'm on the black screen, let me just get back into a resting position. And so there's a little those little VR tricks of like things people do when they aren't thinking about it, so you can take advantage of those things.
Wow, that's a trip. And just, I love
Yeah, this
the
is a fun one
different
too.
play
Yeah,
on
once you start,
gravity.
yeah, we started playing with gravity, and then most people have gotten so used to kind of the world acting the way they assume the real world acts. Then once you kind of just do this little twist on being on the walls, it just adds a little extra like, oh wow, things are getting really crazy now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's awesome. Um, Another thing that I'm interested in kind of learning about from the design perspective for VR, we talked about with engineering some of the considerations you have to take in, especially when it comes to simulation sickness or VR sickness. Are there any
Mhm.
considerations that you as the designer need to take in regards to stuff like that as well?
Oh yeah, yeah. Every time we were testing a level, that was kind of on our list of must ask questions. Like, did anything make you feel sick? Anything pull you out of the experience? And so some of the easy ones there were things that are like pointing at your face are super uncomfortable. Things that are coming towards you really fast are uncomfortable, make you kind of like fight or flight, want to jump out of the
Right.
way. And this was one this level was one where we had things kind of floating in the background, and we found that if they all floated at the same rate, I think it was, uh, everyone got seasick because you're just like seeing the whole world like undulate, and you're very quickly like, oh god, this is a horrible feeling. And so then we
Ah,
learned that, so we just had to like slow down and offset how things float, so that way they aren't all floating the same rate, and then that kind of fixed that. So all of those little things your brain does automatically, that once you break it, your brain's like, "What is happening?" So those things usually jump out at you pretty quick.
yeah. That's That's really interesting. I wouldn't have even considered like the rocks floating all at the same time would be
Yep.
kind of
Because
a
yeah,
trigger for that.
yeah,
Man,
it was a just a little moment of like, wait, what is this? Why do I feel horrible in some of these rooms? And then it was just that of being like, oh, it's because these rocks are moving at the same rate. And yeah, just the little things like that.
yeah. So for a lot of those, did you have to kind of puzzle it out for yourselves of what the best solution was, or were there resources that you were able to look towards to try and find a solution in some of those cases?
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the resources, but one of our designers, Danny, like early on, he did a lot of that researching into like what does and doesn't feel good in virtual reality, and like what metrics, so like how far things should be before they feel like too far away, how
Mm.
close is too close, uh, directions people will and won't look, like how far will someone turn their head before they're just like, this is, I'm not going to turn any further. Like if you put something this far to my right, I'm never going to see it, I'm never going to turn my head all the way right, you know. And so it's
Right.
all those like comfort things where people naturally just won't make themselves too uncomfortable, like they won't look too far up, so once you go a certain distance up, your neck is like, what are you doing? Like I have to like reposition my body to look that far up. And so it's
Mm.
like all those little things. And so once you kind of lay those out, and so we had our metrics kind of laid out in the level editor. And so the camera shows you where the optimal placement of things are, like how far is too far, how far is too right. So that way you always make sure that you're putting elements we wanted you to see or interact with, make sure they were in that space where you could comfortably see and interact with them. And anything outside that space was just flavoring and just for fun, kind of.
That's awesome. I It's a whole extra area of consideration that has to be taken for just VR development
Absolutely.
specifically.
And then once you're doing puzzle solving too, you have so many elements that you need to make sure that they're catching. That if they don't see the right element, then they're gonna have a lot of trouble solving the puzzle. So it's a lot of that things, making sure things are in places where they're not gonna be hard to find. But then also you want to make sure they're going to be things. Some things are in places where they're fun to find. So you want to play with the ability. You want to play with the fact the player can move their head in and out of the space, and so give them interesting things to discover when they do decide to start looking around. And so
Yeah.
that's one I'm going to play with too.
Man, that's really cool. And another thing that sounds difficult is just a whole extra area of
Difficult
consideration.
but fun problems. Yeah, when I first came on the project, the lead at the time was saying how puzzle rooms are really hard and they're going to take a long time. So it was like, yeah, keep trying it, and even though we're going to keep redoing them, just know that it's not too much time. Like, we know they're going to be a long time, so go in with that assumption and then just keep working on it. You get it right, but don't be like, oh, I got to just go with this solution because we've been here too long. It's like, no, it's going to be a long solution, so keep at it.
Yeah.
And then also just plenty of testing. You're going to learn so much from just testing various people who think about things in totally different ways, who interpret the world in different ways. And so you kind of want all those different opinions so that you can build something that kind of works with each person's brain. So everyone's like, okay, I get it, but I found a different solution or different way to get to that conclusion, but enough breadcrumbing so that everyone can get there eventually.
Yeah. I mean, even just this puzzle that we're on right now, how do you come up with this? How do you do this?
Yeah, it's just stacking on, like, what would be interesting? What if we tried this? And then like, does that look cool? Is that fun to do? And then say, okay, well, let's put it somewhere in the puzzle, and then just kind of build things around it and have the puzzle elements sort of intermingle between each other. So you'll use a area of the map and to solve a problem, and then realize later, oh, I have to like reuse that same area in a different way to like solve another problem. So like this one, like you were walking on those vines, but if you come back once the door's open, now you can climb up the vines to get to a thing. And so just kind of reminds you like, hey, a lot of elements can be used in multiple ways. So be sure to think outside the box as often as you can.
Yeah, definitely. I have one last question for you that I'm gonna toss your way. And if you had one tip that you've learned through this project's development to give to other designers or other developers, what do you think that would be?
I mean, yeah, just design in general. Feedback is going to be your best friend. Like, as often as you can, have other people playing your ideas, giving ideas, and just finding out what does and doesn't work, and then making sure you're leaning into what doesn't work or what does work. And then when you find something that doesn't work, you don't have to like take it out or remove it. It's not like a don't do this. It's just more like find out what about this is unpleasant, and then find out what about it is pleasant, and then just make sure you're moving towards, I guess, the pleasant parts, and find ways to kind of cut out the unpleasant bits, because sometimes you might have a great idea that is just hard to read, or maybe like controller wise hard to do, but once you remove that one problem, the idea might be amazing and really sane. And so you're constantly just trying to find the gems in there in your ideas. So, and you're gonna get that by playtesting. And when you're playtesting, look at the people who are playing also, because people, I feel like, do a lot of involuntary feedback giving. When they're confused, they might tilt their head, or when they're frustrated, they might do a little and those things they don't always catch themselves, so they can't tell you when you ask for feedback on paper. They can't tell you like, oh, I was frustrated for this in like a microsecond. But if you can catch those things and then be like, all right, I know how to remove that frustration, it just adds up across the whole game of like those little frustrations being gone, make a really great experience for you to get immersed in. So feedback.
All very good
Plenty,
advice.
plenty of feedback.
Yes. It's like communication on all fronts is pretty
Oh yeah.
important for this whole thing to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, fantastic advice. And thank you so much for taking the time to sit with us and go through some of the really cool and interesting design elements of this project, especially some of
Definitely.
the VR specific challenges that y'all faced. It's something to take into consideration for anyone else who might be interested in doing
Yeah.
projects like this.
I say definitely give it a
Well,
shot. Like, Unreal makes it super easy to hop into a VR scene and start messing around with it. And you can make a lot of really just cool scenes that anything you can think up, you can make it. A lot of these rooms, feel like I daydreamed them and then put them together, and so it's still cool to see them. Be like, yeah, this is what I pictured. And this is just how I pictured it because it's all in VR, so I can literally be in it. So yeah,
yeah.
definitely hop in, give it a shot, see what ideas come to mind.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this and to go through it again. The project is stunning. It's amazing. And I mean, you already know this because it's literally award winning, but just to
You never
further
know.
go into it,
Good reminders.
it's absolutely incredible. So thank you so
Thanks
much.
so much.
And yeah. Also, thank you to the other members of the team who came on today earlier as well. Very much appreciate y'all coming
And
on.
thank
You're
you to any
busy
team members,
people.
anybody watching. Yeah, hi everybody watching.
Yes.
Thanks a lot
Yeah.
for having us.
Of course. Thank you for coming on. This was a lot of fun. And certainly also thank you everyone who came to watch. The show wouldn't be what it is without you and your interaction and your questions. So thank you for coming and being willing to learn and chat about cool development stuff with us. So appreciate y'all being here. We have another episode of Inside Unreal, I believe, next week, next Thursday. So make sure you come back around for that. But other than that, thank y'all so much for coming today, and I'll see you later. Bye, everyone.
Bye.